Welcome back to the show, everybody. We got a great one lined up for you today. We have Linda P. Jones with us and a lot of information that you need to see that's going to take us through this conversation. The map to flip the switch for on-demand liquidity and XRP and Ripple. Somebody roll that beautiful intro.
Digital Perspectives with Brad Kimes. Come on in.
Welcome back to the show, everybody. You can follow us at Dig Perspectives at the top of the screen. It's $1.997 trillion market cap. There's some money creeping back into this market. We're up 2.65% right now on the market. Bitcoin 43,900 plus, Ethereum 3,100 plus. XRP, ladies and gentlemen, is at 84 cents right now, up 6.68% on the 7-day. Range of price right now is 83 cents on the bottom, 85 cents on the top. Letting you know right now, if you haven't done it, check out Glint Pay. Let me get this open here. There it is. I got so many tabs open as a YouTuber, it's laughable, to be honest with you. But this isn't. This is really the alternative to the banking system. It's gold banking, baby. It's owning your own gold right here with Glint Gold. You can take physical delivery of the gold, but it is physically allocated to you if you want to keep it in your account and use a debit card to spend it to hedge inflation. I am doing that right now. I'll keep a link underneath the video, but right now we got Linda P. Jones with us. Linda, how are you today?
Hey, Brad, I'm great. So good to be back with you.
It is great to have you back with us, and we are going to have an incredible conversation, and I happen to know that in advance because we've already had one before we started the video, so I can tell people that. But we're going to talk about some information just over the last 24, 48 hours or so that really is kind of setting the tone for what I believe, and I believe you also believe, is a threshold for us to see us have a flip-the-switch moment to this new digital world. Can you talk about that for a second?
Yeah, I think that we're on this path and we're all on the path together trying to figure out where are we going and what's happening. And we're seeing different waypoints. And as we identify different things along the way, we can really see where we're going. And ultimately, we're going to talk about that flip the switch moment. Absolutely.
And we're going to do that right now, actually. So here we are. We start with the first piece today. This is Daniel, is it Lacow, I believe is how you say it. Is that how you would say it, Linda?
I believe so.
I think so. Yeah, we're going with it. Daniel's with us, and we're going to start with this clip talking to CoinDesk, and he's going to say the excuse of saying cryptocurrencies are used to basically undertake an illegal activity is completely debunked by reality. Let's take a listen real quick. Here we go.
Certainly. First, we need to completely debunk the idea that cryptocurrencies are being used solely for purposes of avoiding sanctions, etc. If we know what is going on really, most of the oligarchs or the people that are trying to avoid sanctions, what they're truly using is either the yuan, the Chinese currency, or gold. Cryptocurrencies are being used, and it is true, by the poor Russian citizens that have nothing to blame on in the country and in Ukraine to avoid the destruction of the purchasing power of the ruble. That is a
Well, let me stop right there, Linda, because it kind of sums up exactly what he's talking about. But he makes a mention about the yuan and gold being the more dangerous alternative. What are your thoughts there?
Well, we've already heard from Brad Garlinghouse and others that we're not using cryptocurrencies to get around sanctions, that is not what's happening. Mm-hmm. And so it's just another way of proving that what the rumors are or what's being falsely reported is just not correct.
Absolutely. Now, you have a thread that you did, I believe, just late yesterday afternoon or early evening yesterday, and it was a thread on Vladimir Putin and the Russian ruble here. Can you take us through this really quickly?
Yeah, well, it was announced last night, and I saw an article in Russian. So I went to translate it to see what it said, and I was astounded at what I read. So I wrote this thread late last night, and I said Vladimir Putin just sent the final blow to the dollar and euro, which, in my opinion, will now force adoption of XRP as the global bridge currency. Today, Putin announced he will only accept rubles for gas sales to unfriendly nations. So basically, in a nutshell, he's calling the US and the EU unfriendly nations. And he's saying, I'm willing to sell gas. That's not a problem. He's not going to discontinue. He could stop gas sales, which would really hurt Europe because 40% of their gas is purchased from Russia. So he could, really wound them and their economy, but he's not saying that. He's saying, I will sell you gas. I will offer it at the price we've contractually agreed to. However, I'm not going to accept unfriendly or compromised currencies, which are euros and dollars. He's only going to accept the Russian ruble.
And I find that to be really a hell of a statement when you think about the idea that the Russian ruble has taken such a hit. Isn't this to really try to shore up the damage that the Russian ruble and the economy in Russia has taken over this conflict, Linda?
It is, but it's also something that he is saying logically, why should he accept a currency when we're not getting along and he's been sanctioned? So why should he continue to accept those currencies? And then we also remember that that Russia and China talked about having gold-backed currencies, and that the UAE talked about trading oil with Russia and China and not using the dollar. Remember all of those conversations we've seen in the news?
I sure do. And to your point about those conversations, Linda, I mean, the gentleman in the clip that we just played was talking about more of a danger of the yuan being used as an example that you're talking about now.
Right. And we know that the BRICS countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, already created an alternative to the SWIFT banking system called the SIP system, which is the cross-border interbank payment system.
That's right.
And that system was specifically created to not use the US dollar and to be able to trade without using the dollar. So this is another variation of that, because he's saying we're not going to use dollars or euros. We're going to use Russian rubles that are going to be gold-backed. And ultimately, the reason I even wrote about this is because there's no way for people to really access rubles because of the sanctions. So really, it was obvious to me that the way to solve the problem and to trade and to purchase Europe's gas from Russia is to use XRP. And one XRP currently equals 80.87 rubles. They can just use the XRP ledger, use XRP as the bridge currency, and that way anyone can access rubles. They don't have to actually physically collect them anymore.
You use a term in your thread that you put out that I feel like will now force adoption of XRP. And I think that's a really key word that you used there that was very smart of you to use, because we know that there's still issues with a certain level of liquidity at the current time, right? So there is a liquidity issue where certainly we could see a collateralization of the ledger to solve that liquidity problem too, by the way. And the other issue we have to keep in mind in this as well, playing devil's advocate, what would the globe think of using XRP to get the rubles, to get the oil, in a sense, to still have the energy they need in Europe? And would that be considered breaking sanctions as well, right?
Right. And it's not just Europe that's involved. I mean, this goes to Canada, Japan,
China,
Norway, Singapore, South Korea, Ukraine, China, Switzerland. I mean, all of Britain, all of these countries are needing to trade with Russia for energy. And so if they don't have access to rubles, what can they do? Well, they can use XRP and use it as a bridge currency to give Russia the rubles that they want and use whatever currency they have to be transposed into rubles.
Well, I think you make a great point. And again, I want to make a point about the will now force adoption. So force the globe to really address the issues at hand of the swift sanctions in this conflict, creating fractionalized zones around the world now, like BRICS itself, as you mentioned. And I believe we're going to talk about something in just a second that's new as well. And it's really the news of the BIS and the 63 banks that are really a part of the BIS, possibly working around their own platform to really not use Ripple or XRP has been the news of the last 24, 36 hours news cycle here. And I want to get to that in a second. But before we do, I want people to understand we're going to take a look at this from Yanis Varoufakis, I believe it is. And forgive me, Yanis, if I've messed up your last name. It wouldn't be my first time. But 2016, he did a clip here where he really says, you know, we're going to go from that 1933 Bretton Woods moment, and I'm going to let him say it, but, you know, to where we are now with the tech and the possibility. Are we, before we look at this clip, Linda, are we in that transition moment now, do you believe?
I believe we are very close to that moment because we're already starting to see that fiat currencies are changing. And this is because ultimately all governments are bankrupt. They have more debt than they're able to repay. And that means that their currencies have to be reset. And as we've talked about in the past, that is always done with a gold-backed system. And a gold-backed ruble and a gold-backed yuan have already been discussed, and we're already merging into that phase and that next transition. We're right there where we're moving out of fiat and away from that and into these gold-backed currencies.
Absolutely. It's well said. And I would like to add too, for those that, you know, think along these lines with the XRP Ledger, understanding it is a decentralized exchange to bridge the conventional paper friction world into the digital world we're moving to. You know, it can also, the XRP Ledger and XRP token can be backed by many other things in gold, but to the point you're making, it really all starts with gold when you're talking about revaluing currencies. Now, I'm going to play this quick clip from Yanis here and listen to what he says about a new system and a new coin here, which he calls Cosmos, but I like to think of XRP instead.
At the level of the global political economy, imagine for a moment that our national currencies have a free-floating exchange rate with a universal global digital currency, one that is issued by the International Monetary Fund, the G20, on behalf of all humanity. And imagine further that all international trade is denominated in this currency. Let's call it the cosmos, in units of cosmos. With every government agreeing to be paying into a common fund a sum of cosmos units proportional to the country's trade deficit, or indeed to a country's trade surplus.
Now, just very quickly here, I want to remind people that this aligns greatly with what I talk about on the channel a lot about being able to collateralize the decentralized exchange, the XRP Ledger, Linda. You know, I believe that this is what he's saying here could be, in fact, exactly how we have seen non-cash agreements, according to line 82 in the SEC complaint, that Ripple had achieved and agreed to do seigniorage to prime the pump on those specific corridors for those market makers to incentivize them to hold this new bridge asset, even if they aren't using it yet. You know, maybe take an options contract on it, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, and I don't see one global currency being used. I do agree with you that XRP is the bridge currency that's going to allow countries to continue to have their own currencies, rather than having the one overall currency. That I just don't see that coming.
Such a great point that you're making here, and I believe in the point you just made is exactly why we win. is because we're a complement to the system, not a threat to the system. I'm going to let the rest of this clip play.
And imagine that that fund is utilized to invest in green technologies, especially in parts of the world where investment funding is scarce. This is not a new idea. It's what, effectively, John Maynard Keynes proposed in 1944 at the Bretton Woods Conference. The problem is that back then, they didn't have the technology to implement it. Now we do, especially in the context of a reunified political, economic sphere.
Now, without getting too far into that, I think you and I both know we don't like to touch the political side of that. But, we both agree that the technology does exist now. And it exists with XRPLedger and XRP, does it not?
It does. And that's where the Project Dunbar information is so interesting, because it's going to allow banks to issue central bank digital currencies and pay each other internationally.
Absolutely.
And they had to work out the governance, the access, and the regulations. And that's already been worked on for years. Remember, and you know this, Brad, and our audience knows this, that banking cannot just be spontaneous. It has to be planned. You have to have, all the systems planned, all the banks on board, all the countries' regulations, and everything agreed to before you can have a system like this. So this has been going on in the background for years. And the governance is a huge part of it, because in the past, the United States had complete control after Bretton Woods because they were the world's reserve currency. That gave us an exceptional power in that, obviously, oil was traded in US dollars, but also we, as the world's reserve currency, didn't really have to adjust to currency fluctuation like other countries did. They adjusted to our currency. We didn't have to adjust to theirs. And now going forward, we're not going to have one world reserve currency. We're going to have the ability to settle on a level playing field amongst different currencies using XRP, I believe, as the bridge.
Okay, so now I'm going to play this clip here of Project Dunbar. Linda, you shared this just a little while ago. This is 3 minutes and 40 seconds of fire. I'm going to let this play. I think it explains a lot. And for those that feel like it's not quite clear, we're going to touch on this after it's over. I'm going to roll this clip.
Cross-border payments can be slow and expensive. But does it have to be? Domestic payments are usually fast and inexpensive because most banks connect to a single national payments platform. But there is no single international platform for cross-border payments. Instead, to make cross-border payments, banks need to hold foreign currency accounts with banks in other countries. This is the decades-old model of correspondent banking. A single cross-border payment may pass through multiple correspondent banks, adding costs and delays along the way. But what if we could merge all these separate banking systems and bring them onto one single common platform? That's the goal of Project Dunbar. We're exploring the benefits of a single international payments platform, similar to the national platforms that many developed economies rely upon. This single international platform will connect multiple central banks and commercial banks. Each central bank will be able to use this shared platform to issue their digital currencies, or CBDCs. Banks can then use these CBDCs in multiple currencies to make payments to each other. These payments would be direct from bank to bank with no intermediaries. This streamlined process means payments will be cheaper and faster. Let's see how it works, step by step. First, central banks issue their CBDCs, representing different currencies on the shared platform. Banks will be able to hold and transact with both local and foreign CBDCs. Local banks can exchange for CBDCs using their central bank balances on domestic payments networks. Non-local banks will be able to exchange CBDCs with other banks, and hold CBDCs even from countries they do not have a presence in. As a result, it will be possible for all banks to pay each other directly in all the different CBDCs. However, while we can look forward to streamlined, cheaper, and faster cross-border payments, there are challenges to overcome. The first challenge is governance. How do we get multiple central banks to share a common platform? Who will own and operate the platform? Can we resolve the national security concerns that come from sharing critical infrastructures with other central banks? The second challenge is access. How do we allow non-local banks to access and make payments with CBDCs? Can central banks trust banks from other jurisdictions when they do not supervise those banks directly? The final challenge is regulations and jurisdictional boundaries. Payment regulations are different in each country, so how do we simplify the cross-border payments flow while respecting these differences? BIS is working with multiple partners to solve these challenges. The ultimate goal is for a common settlement platform for multi-CBDCs in order to make cross-border payments cheaper, faster, and safer.
So, Linda, talk to me about your thoughts here. What are you thinking?
Well, when I see that, and I'm seeing that the Bank of International Settlements is talking about these reserve banks of different countries being able to trade internationally with digital currency and central bank digital currencies, which is the digital version of their official currency in their country. And that's how it's different from just being a stable coin. But we know that XRP and XLM have been mentioned as the two technologies and cryptocurrencies that can issue stable coins. So we know this technology could be used to elevate it from just a stable coin to a central bank digital currency. And that makes them uniquely special and uniquely suited to be the solution to this cross-border trading system, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think to your point, I also want to say that, I also feel like, the other big point to make in there is that Project Dunbar, the BIS video, is saying, no intermediaries, right? And isn't that what a decentralized exchange like the XRP-Ledger is? It's no intermediary, Linda?
That's exactly right, Brad. And it's just so beautiful how it's all coming together. And because it's decentralized, that just really wraps it up in a nice bow.
It really does. And I think to put a bow on this, look, let's talk about this because you brought this up and we've talked about it here on the channel quite a bit. This is Brad Garlinghouse right here from the most recent Swell event just late last year. And let's listen to what he talked about. This is pretty remarkable. Okay, here we go.
We started building RippleNet with the thesis that crypto liquidity would eventually be able to support robust global payments, large payments. RippleNet was designed so that customers seeing the benefits of our fiat-based network could flip the switch to ODL once the market was mature enough. And this is exactly what's happening.
I mean, Linda, what are your thoughts there?
I mean, people have asked, well, what about liquidity? How can this be done? Well, we've already talked about the private ledger, which is running the liquidity right now. That is where the central banks, the governments, the large institutions are operating and are using the XRP technology and the XRP ledger. And so that liquidity is already there. And we already have heard from Brad that once the market is mature enough, they'll be able to flip the switch to ODL, on-demand liquidity. And that is exactly what's happening. So he's telling us that eventually we are coming to this flip the switch moment. And he says it's happening now.
He really does. And I tell you, if you think about the fact that that was December of 2021, and here we are discussing, the success of Project Dunbar, right? And all the things that are happening with that to tie into many different banks through the BIS Innovation Hub and all of this. I mean, it looks like the plan's coming together to me is what it looks like. What do you think, Linda?
Me too. It's coming together beautifully. And again, if you own XRP, get it off the exchanges. XLM, get it off the exchange, get it in a cold wallet and in your possession. It's a very valuable asset.
Linda, thank you so much for your insights. It's always great to speak with you. We'll talk to you soon.
Okay, Brad, thank you.
Thank you.